Today I'm going to be showing you how to knit the Filsa sweater step by step. We will be knitting the smallest size, which is the 0 to 3 month size. If you do want to knit any of the other sizes, which I have up to 1 year, you can check out my Ravelry page, which I'll have linked below. So in order to knit this sweater, we're going to need a few different things. The first of which being some DK weight yarn. In the pattern, I had recommended Drops Merino Extra Fine, but today I'm using Double Sunday, which is what I knit this sweater in. If you're a beginner knitter, you can get away with using any DK weight yarn and it's going to turn out fine. If you do want to get gauge, try and stay around 105 meters to 108 meters per 50 grams. We will need 2 different needles. They are both the same size, so these are US 6 4mm needles. This one is a 16-inch, so we will use this to knit the yoke all the way through to the body. And then this one here is a 32-inch. So actually, I believe this is 40 inches, but 32 inches will be fine. This is what we will use for the sleeves to knit magic loop. We're also going to use 5 stitch markers. 4 of them can be the same, and then we'll need 1 of them to look different. This will be the beginning of round marker. We want to make sure that it's different so that we don't do any increases when we hit that marker. If you don't have stitch markers, you can make them out of some scrap yarn just by making a little loop and tying a knot. We'll use this scrap yarn also to put our sleeve stitches on hold when we're ready to knit the body. We will need a tapestry needle to weave in the ends and also attach this button. And then the last thing we need is 1 button, and it can be about 1 centimeter to 1.5 centimeters. We're ready to start working the yoke of our sweater, and we're going to bring in our first skein of yarn with the 16-inch needles. We'll be using a long tail cast on for this sweater. If you don't know how to work the long tail cast on, I'll have a video tutorial linked below, and you can just pause this and then come back when you're ready. So we'll start with a slip knot. You can use whatever slip knot you know how to do. Onto the needle, and we will cast on 51 stitches for this yoke. All right, so I have cast on 51 stitches. We will not be joining in the round initially. We're going to work back and forth to create this hole for the head, and then we'll join in the round later on. So we'll turn our work, and the first row is going to be a wrong side, so we will be purling all the way across this row. These first stitches that have been cast on are always the trickiest. They're a little bit tight on the needles and they're hard to budge, but it will get easier after this row. As we're coming up to the final stitch here, a good tip is to make sure that we're knitting these edge stitches extra tight. So we're not pulling up on this yarn at all when we pick up this stitch. We're just putting in our needle and then knitting really tightly there. That's going to help create a nice edge along this side here. If we're knitting loosely, all it's going to do is make some of these stitches pop out a bit, which isn't the end of the world, but it will help with the cleaner finish. So we've just completed our first wrong side row, and we are going to turn, so we're back on the right side, which is the knit side. On this row, we're going to knit all the way until we get to these last 2 stitches here. When we get to these last 2 stitches, we are going to yarn over. And what that yarn over is going to do is make a buttonhole. So there's the yarn over. So knitting all the way until the last 2 stitches, knitting this first stitch extra tight here, not pulling on the yarn at all. All right, so we have come to our last 2 stitches. So what we're going to do is take our working yarn and put it over top of the needle. So you're just looping it over like that, and then continuing to knit the last 2 stitches. And that's a yarn over, super easy. We are back on a wrong side row. When we get to that yarn over stitch, we are just going to purl it like normal and just pretend it's a normal stitch. So purling all the way back across these stitches now. All right, we're back on a right side row, and this time we are going to set up for our raglan increases. So we're going to be placing these 4 stitch markers throughout these stitches. First, we will knit 9 stitches. We're going to place a marker. Now these first 9 stitches, if we look at the sweater here, they are these stitches up here. So they're half of the back when the back gets closed. And then we will knit across the arm, across the front, the other arm, and the back, placing a stitch marker between each of these sections. So we have just knit 9 stitches and placed our stitch marker. Now we are going to knit 8 stitches, and that will be for the sleeve. After 8 stitches, take another stitch marker and place it on. Now we are going to knit 18 stitches, and this is for the front section. After the 18, we place another marker. Now we are going to knit another 8, which is going to be for the other arm. Place your final marker, and then these last 9 stitches are for the other half of the back. All right, so we are all set up for our raglan increases. We will turn and work a purl row. This time we are just going to slip the markers. So we won't be doing any increases on the wrong side. We are just slipping the markers back and forth. Okay, we're now back on the right side. We have purled across the row and we just slipped the markers. We did not do any increases. This time we are going to start our raglan increases, which happen 1 stitch before each marker and then right after each marker. Our increases are going to be made using make one right and make one left. I will break it down a little bit in this video, but if you need a tutorial, there will be a proper one linked below the description. So I'm now 1 stitch before the marker, and I am going to pick up this middle bar here that connects these 2 stitches and put it on my needle this way. You want to make sure it looks like this, because if it's facing the other way, that will be for the make one left increase. So again, we're going to put it up here, and this is what it looks like for the make one right increase. We're going to slip our needle in and grab the yarn in the back, and that's it for the make one right. Then we will knit 1 stitch, slip the marker, and this is where we're going to make one left. So we will now pick up the bar again and put it on the opposite way. So it does not look like this for the make one right, it's now make one left. We'll slip our needle into the yarn back here, and that's it for make one left. So we'll now knit up to the next stitch marker here. So we stop 1 stitch before, pick up the bar for make one right, slip our needle in, grab the yarn, knit 1, slip the marker, and now we will make one left. And that's it. So we will continue to do that along the next 2 markers. So now we're just going to purl all the way back across, again, just slipping the markers. The increase rows are always going to have 2 parts. The first will be on the right side where we do the increases. The second part will be on the wrong side where we just slip the markers. So let's purl all the way across and then meet back on the right side. We've now completed our first 2 parts of the increase rounds. So those 2 parts are going to happen 8 times. So part 1 will be increasing on the right side at every marker and then purling across. So 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, all the way to 8 times. Once we've finished the 8 times, we will stop before the next increase round. After completing those parts 8 more times, your sweater will start to look something like this. We have that really pretty raglan shaping taking place here, and we have a lot more stitches on the needles. So we are going to work an increase round one more time. However, on the second part, we are not going to turn around and purl. We're going to start working in the round. So we'll use that beginning of round marker and we'll place it after we finish one more set of increases here. So I've done my 2 increases at each of these 4 stitch markers one more time. And as I'm coming up to the end here, what we usually do is we turn and we start purling. But what I'm going to do now is spread these stitches out along the needles, and I am going to join to work in the round. So I'm going to take my beginning of round marker here, slip it on the needle, and then I'm just going to continue knitting. This is a really good time to stop and count all of the different stitches along your needles. For this back section, we should have 38 stitches in total. So from the red stitch marker to the red stitch marker, we should have 38 stitches. On this sleeve, we should have 28 stitches. The front section should have the same as the back, so 38 stitches. And then the second sleeve should also have 28 stitches. So if you count all those up and the math is right, you're ready to continue on knitting. If your numbers are off, you can either go back and fix it, or you can just increase or decrease as needed just to make it line up. It's not a big deal. So if everything's good to go, you're just going to continue knitting in the round until your sweater from the cast on edge here measures 4 inches. If you don't have a ruler, you could knit about 4 more rounds and that should be good. But I will take my ruler here and I will measure as flat as I can. So I have about 1/2 inch to go. So about 4 or 5 more rounds and I should be good. When we get to our stitch markers here, we're no longer going to be increasing. We're just going to be slipping the stitches. Slipping the stitch markers, sorry. I have knit all the way around back to the beginning of round 4 more times now. So my sweater is measuring about 4 inches from the cast on edge. It's now time for my favorite part, which is putting the sleeves on hold. I find this is when the sweater really starts to come together and looks like a sweater, not just a piece of fabric we're knitting in a circle. So we're going to knit up until that first stitch marker. When I get to this stitch marker, I'm going to take it off and I am going to thread my scrap yarn through my tapestry needle. I'm now going to take the 28 stitches that are for the sleeve and put them onto the scrap yarn. All right, so push these stitches a little bit further down the needle so they don't fall off. You can now tie this yarn to a little knot or a bow. And there we go. So one of our sleeves is now set aside. The next thing we need to do is cast on 6 new stitches that are going to be a part of the body, and eventually we'll pick them up for the sleeves as well. So I'm going to use the backwards loop method for this. I just place the yarn over my thumb and then slip it onto the needle. So there's 1, 2, 3. After these 3, I'm actually going to take my beginning of round marker off and place it right here. This is going to be our new beginning of round. So I'll continue 4, 5, 6. Now we're going to join up this yarn. We can take this marker off with this stitch right here. So we're just going to continue knitting across the front of the sweater now, all the way to the next marker. Now that I've reached the stitch marker, I'll remove it. I am going to once again grab another piece of scrap yarn and my tapestry needle, thread it through, and I'm going to place these 28 stitches now onto this thread. All right, again, I'm going to take that stitch marker off, push these needles down. All right, now that we have those stitches on hold, we're going to cast on another 6 stitches using the backward loop method. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We will again join this stitch with the yarn. Okay, so you can see that our sleeve stitches are now set on hold and it's starting to look like a real sweater. So I've knit across to my beginning of round marker. These new cast on stitches are a little bit tricky. I find it's easier if you slip them right to the end to pick them up rather than trying to pick them up while they're back here because they're pretty tight. So you're just going to keep knitting in circles in the round until your sweater body measures about 2.25 inches. So about that much more. Once you get there, wait at the beginning of round and we're going to get ready to start the lace work section. The body of the sweater is now measuring about 2¼ inches from the underarm here. So that means we are ready to start working the lace work section. This section is super simple. It's knit only using 2 techniques. One of them you've already done to knit the buttonhole up at the top. Which side is it on? Right here. So we've already worked the yarn over, which is one of the techniques used. And the second technique will be knit 2 together. So we'll start by knitting 1 stitch. Then we are going to knit 2 stitches together. So we just grab onto both of these stitches and knit them as normal. And then we are going to yarn over. So that's it for the lace work part. That's all we need to do. And then we're going to knit 6 stitches. Again, we're going to knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 6. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 6, and we're just going to keep going all the way around. You'll notice when you get to the end, you're not going to have 6 stitches to knit, you're only going to have 5 to knit. That's because one of them's over on this side. So just keep going with knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 6, until the last one when you're going to knit 5. All right, so we're back at the beginning of round marker. This next round, all we're going to do is knit all of the stitches right back to the beginning of round. Next, we are going to start with a knit 2 together. So grabbing both of these stitches and yarn over. From there, we'll knit 6. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 6, and we'll continue all the way to the beginning of round. So the next 3 rounds are plain knit rounds. So you'll just knit around in a circle 3 times and wait at the beginning of round again. Our next round is going to start off by knitting 4 and then knitting 2 together, yarn over, knit 6. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 6, and all the way around until you're at the end when you'll only have 2 left to knit. Our next round is again just going to be a plain knit round all the way back to the beginning of round. Our final round of the lacework section is going to start with knit 3, knit 2 together, yarn over, and knit 6. And we will continue with the knit 6, knit 2 together, yarn over, all the way until the beginning when we should have 3 stitches left. The last thing we have left to do before we bind off is to knit 3 more rounds. So 3 more times to the beginning of round, and then we will start our bind off. For this sweater, we're going to be working an I-cord bind off. Again, there's going to be a really great tutorial by another YouTuber underneath this video if you want to check that out. So we're going to start by knitting into this first stitch, but not taking it off the needle. We're going to put a new stitch up and do the same thing. Grab that yarn, put it up, and one more time. So we now have 3 new stitches out of that first stitch there. What we're going to do now is knit into this first stitch, knit into the second stitch, and for the third stitch, we're going to knit it through the back with this other stitch right here. So we're going to knit them together through the back loop. All right, what we're going to do next is slip these 3 back onto our left needle and do that again. So knitting the first stitch, knitting the second stitch, and knitting the third one through the back loop with the stitch next to it. Slide them back over, and you're going to do that a million more times until you're all the way back around at this marker here. Okay, I've worked the last stitches of my bind off here, so I'm going to slide these 3 over to this side of the needle once again. At this point, you can break or cut your yarn, and we're going to grab our tapestry needle, thread the yarn through, and we're going to grab this first stitch here this way. Move these ones back so they don't fall off. And then we're going to be looking for the first V here in this I-cord. So this stitch is a little bit messy, so I'm going to go through this first proper stitch and pull through. Now what I'm going to do is go back in through this stitch here, and I'm going to bring it together with this one and pull this off the needle. Move this one back. I'm now going to go in looking for the second V here. So here's the first, and this looks like the second neat one. So I'll pull that through. Again, I'm going to look for the stitch that this bar comes through here, right here. And then move this one back up, bring these together, and then I'm going to look for the last V, which is this stitch here, and tighten this up. So there is my I-cord finish. I'm just going to bring this yarn to the other side, and then I can start weaving in the ends when I'm ready. We are ready to move on to the sleeve, so I'm going to bring in that 32-inch now. I'm done with the shorter cord and I'm going to bring in the longer one. The first thing we're going to do is pick up these stitches that are on hold here. So I'm just going through each loop all the way around. Now that I have all of these stitches back on the needles, I can get rid of this waste yarn here. And we are going to separate these stitches so that we have 14 on each needle. So I'm going to count 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. I'm going to pull this cord out here and separate these stitches. So to work magic loop, I'm going to take these back ones back off the needles and I'm going to work these front stitches first. So I will grab my yarn and we will start by picking up 3 stitches along this cast on edge. So I can see the ones I want are 1, 1, 2, and 3. We have 6 in total. So I will take this yarn, go through my first stitch here, pull the yarn through, and there's 1, 2, and 3. So now there's a pretty big gap here, and what I like to do is pick this up, and it's going to help close the hole that will be underneath the armpit at the end of this. So I'm going to grab it with this needle. I'll get rid of this yarn first. I'm going to grab it with this hand, and then I'm going to go in through the back here to pick up this yarn. There we go. So we've picked up 4 stitches in total. Now I am going to knit across the rest of the 14 stitches. Okay, so next we turn our work. So the stitches we just worked are now along the back. We're going to put these stitches back on this needle here, and now these are our front stitches that we're going to work. So we slide the back ones off the needle and start knitting across this set of 14 stitches. Now that we're back at the beginning here, we want to pick up this bridge again. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab this bridge right here. Again, knitting it through the back and picking that up. Now we can go in and get the other 3 stitches from our cast on edge down here. So I see my first one is right here. I'm going to pick this one up. 1, 2, 3. So I've now picked up 3 cast on edge stitches and then 1 stitch that was under the gap there. Turn my work, putting these stitches back on the needle, and now we are set up for magic loop. So I'm going to continue working these stitches across one needle and then across the other. I'll show this one more time. This first stitch here has a loose end of yarn, so you'll notice that it pulls out and you can just pull that end back to keep it tight. Turn my work. Those stitches I just worked are in the back. I will pull this end through and slide those ones off and then knit across these stitches here. turn my work, slide the needle back through, and at this point, there are no decreases on this sleeve for the sweater. So all you need to do is continue knitting those 2 needles until the sleeve measures about 4.5 inches, 4.5 inches. And it's just straight knitting, no decreases. Once you get to that 4.5 inches, you're going to do the same I-cord bind off that you did for the body. And then the second sleeve is knit exactly the same as the first. So it's smooth sailing from here. You're going to knit this sleeve, bind off, this sleeve, bind off, and then you're going to have a finished sweater. So we will meet back up after that. And there we have it, our finished Filsa sweater. There are a few more things that we need to do. So weaving in the ends of yarn that are hanging from your project, you're going to take your tapestry needle and you're going to turn the sweater inside out. You can just flip up an edge of the sweater, and we're going to weave in the ends of yarn through the purl bumps on the inside of the sweater. I like to do this 3 times on 3 different purl bumps, so just back and forth. After that, we need to attach our button. So you'll see on this side of the back here, we have our yarn over hole. We want to attach the button on the other side. If you find because your button is so small that your tapestry needle isn't fitting through the holes on your button, what you can do is use a sewing needle instead, but you're going to need to split up your yarn. So take your yarn about 8 inches and split it in half, and this will help you put it through the end of the sewing needle. After that, we're just going to thread the needle through each of the buttonholes and tie a few knots in the back. After that, you are all set. Thank you so much for following along with this video. If you liked it, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe. I'm also going to leave my other social media platforms below, and you can keep an eye out. If you like this pattern, I'm hoping to release some more very soon. Thanks, everyone.